Questions? Now to Bridget.
Thank you. Lots of similar themes I think I'll be touching on. I should say I don't have any slides, because when I was thinking about the question that I was posed, I spent most of my time trying to think of nice pictures to illustrate the points rather than thinking about the points I wanted to make themselves, which led me to maybe that's part of the problem. How many of us are spending our time writing PowerPoint presentations? Yeah, look at that. I've got the best vote in the House, but that's what's happened. We've become, I think, the danger of the department that says I need a presentation, not a department that says I need some big thinking or some good thinking, not necessarily big. Anyway, just as an aside. So when I was asked to think about this topic, my instinct was that I agree with the 4 people that put their hands up at the beginning to say I thought strategy, and therefore strategists, were moving further downstream and away from impacting clients' bottom line. I thought I'd explain why I got to that conclusion. I think if I start, it's because my observation is that we're spending more and more time doing what I would call tactics rather than strategy. And that is providing creative stimulus at that point of the process, and then taking those ideas and working out the comms planning and the ecosystems for those ideas, which I would say makes more about tactics than it is about strategy. And that was just an observation I made about how much time we were spending doing those things. It's interesting, we talked about efficiency. And I think sometimes we mix up efficiency from effectiveness and spend a lot of our time looking at the things that we can measure, and we're really good at now measuring sales, which helps us drive understanding of ROI and efficiency, but not necessarily doing the things that are effective. So then I just thought I'd ask myself, why has that happened? Why is it that I feel we're spending more of our time doing what I'd call tactics rather than strategy? And I think if I was to characterise the shift that I've seen, it's away from brand-centric thinking to consumer-centric thinking, if I look at it over time. And in a way, it's no surprise that that's happened, because I guess when I started in this business, the thing that was fixed was consumers. We knew where they were watching TV, and we knew how to find them. So actually, most of our time was spent thinking about the brand that we worked on and how we could possibly present that brand in its most favourable light to make it attractive to people. Of course, the world has changed, and actually a lot of our time is now working out where consumers are. And a lot of the data that we've just talked about, we know everything about them, but the danger is that's where we spend all our time, looking at what's happening there. I thought it was interesting, again, this book is from 1981. Who's read this, Positioning the Battle for Your Mind? I think it was one of the reasons I wanted to work in advertising, because it talked about really big strategic thoughts that changed the way a company operated. It was things like how to reposition a country or how to reposition a political party. And they felt like ideas that really did change things. I don't know if I call it big thinking, it was just thinking that I wish I'd come up with. It was always my test of things to go, wow, I wish I'd done that. And I was thinking about ideas that I would look at like that. And the 4th emergency service for the AA is one of those sorts of ideas. And it led me to think, how many ideas can we all look at now and say they're the kind of ideas that are happening? And I thought to myself, anyone here from Inferno? I think This Girl Can is the most recent example of one of those sorts of ideas that I think probably a lot of us looked at and thought, wow, that is saying something that is different and radical and distinctive, and I wish I'd done that. But the fact that I could only find one recent example made me kind of go, are we doing the sorts of things that we think stand up and take notice? I hope good thinking becomes one of those. I think there's a degree of fame that has to be attached to those ideas to feel like they're the ones that I'm talking about, I suppose, ideas that fundamentally change things. I would ask you if anyone got any more recent examples, because I'd love to collect them. And the disappointing thing I've got at the moment is that This Girl Can hasn't entered an IPA award, so I'm wondering whether they've got the data to prove that it is actually changing behaviour. I hope so. So I guess that's my first piece of evidence that I collected along the way to say I'm not sure that we're coming up with those big brand thoughts that we're used to. So if I thought we were moving further downstream, we're having less of those. I think there's another consequence of our obsession with finding consumers, and that is the rise of comms planning. And I think there is a shift in terms of the amount of time that we are now spent thinking about comms planning. We've got lots of clients now who say to us, do not show us any of the ideas before you've shown me the comms plan and what that looks like. And just to illustrate the point, I saw a presentation a week ago that was about how to do comms planning. It had 9 steps in it. Each step was very complicated. A series of boxes that you had to fill in, grids and things, and you had to do each step in turn before you could get to the end and present the comms plan. I'm not advocating that as an approach, but I thought I'd illustrate it as an illustration of how much time it is spent doing comms planning. Are we all doing comms planning here? Yeah. And I'm not saying it's not important. It's absolutely fundamental, but it's meaning that we have less time for doing some of the kinds of thinking that we've talked about earlier today. Less time, I guess, addressing some of the bigger client issues that they might have. I also don't think it's helped that we've sort of fragmented our discipline. So we have social strategists, cultural strategists, comms planners, behavioural strategists, brand strategists. And it's a bit like the quote you had earlier, which is if that's the lens that you look at the world, that's how you see it, and that's the answer you'll get to. So if everybody's looking at it from their particular angle, who's doing the big thinking? And is it still happening? Or is everybody looking at their sort of smaller slice of things? You can challenge all this at the end anyway. I just thought I'd put a point of view across. And I think if I wanted another piece of evidence, I would hold some of it at clients' doors, and I'd say they're partly responsible for what's happened. Because I think, and we've used this phrase a lot, short-term in their approach. And I can understand why, because they're under increasing pressure because we can now prove things so quickly. They're under increasing pressure to prove things so quickly. And the easiest way to do that is to develop short-term ideas that can turn around quickly. I think there's a little bit of the fact that they are so busy doing that they don't have time to potentially think about some of the longer-term issues. I also think some of my clients have been very, very seduced by the new. So we're here. How many of your senior clients have been to Google HQ across the pond and been driven around in driverless cars and come back evangelical about they've seen the future? And therefore, they would like you to show them how you're going to, what is your Facebook strategy? What is your Google strategy? What's your YouTube strategy? And it's become really important, but quite a thing for them to focus on. And I think, and it was mentioned earlier, which is sometimes clients are only open to new thinking at a pitch stage. And it seems to me that a lot of the examples that we use as an industry of big thinking usually happen after a pitch. And so I guess, if there was one of my takeaways, it's what can we do on a daily basis to avoid a pitch, but potentially ask some of those questions that only get asked at a pitch stage. Because you're all aware of them, it's just we kind of bury them as we think about the short-term things that we need to do. So that was one of the things I was thinking about. But then I got more optimistic, as is our nature of the people that work in this industry. And I thought, actually, I'm not sure it's entirely true that we have become more sort of going down the food chain, if I want to use that expression. And then I thought, well, why could that be? That it actually, if I want to look at the other point of view and say, no, I don't think it's true, I think we can still impact the boardroom, why do I think that? Now, I think the first thing to say is I think we know more than we've ever known before about how things work. We've got the likes of Byron Sharp from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute that have kind of given us a formula. We can choose to disagree with some of it, but at least they've had a go at looking at it. And they've used data to tell us what they think works and why it works. So at least we've got some theories that we can test and some hypotheses. So I'd say we know more, and it's part of our responsibility, I think, to make sure we are on top of those pieces of information that are out there, to actually help us look like we know what we're talking about rather than just be subjective about our thinking. I also think it's been referenced already, the IPA database, 16,000 case studies that we've got that absolutely prove the effectiveness of what we do. It's always about payback to the bottom line. It's about driving business growth. So there is a mine of information that we can use to show that we understand how the world works. And increasingly, the cases aren't just about the big kind of fame-driving initiatives. A couple of the papers that happened last year, one was for The Economist, and one was for Narellan Pools, which is an Australian outdoor pool manufacturer, are really, really fantastic cases of proving that you can drive the short term really, really effectively, but also a nod to the longer term that we've all talked about. I also think there's never been more of a creative opportunity for us. Because, again, we've got the proof that says creatively awarded work outperforms non-creatively awarded work. So, again, the chance for us to do things that make a real difference have never been greater, I would say. I was going to talk to you off the record, she says, about the Sainsbury's pitch that we did last year. I'm looking at Sarah, I didn't tell you I was going to do this. But we didn't win it, and it's gone to Wident, and it's really exciting what they're doing. But I thought I'd share with you the thinking that we did behind it if you'd be interested. Because I think, back to trying to come up with ideas that influence a company, not just advertising. We presented an idea to them that was about, we are going to inspire the nation to cook. And we backed that up by showing that if you could get people to cook more, they would be willing to pay more for food because they'd become more discerning about the ingredients that they use. And of course, we'd be doing society some good because the more people cook, the healthier they tend to eat, and therefore they would go on and lead happier, healthier lives. So I would say inspire the nation to cook is one of those sorts of ideas that we should be aspiring to, even if they didn't want it at the time. Because I think if we get it right, we can impact every bit of an organisation way beyond just the advertising. And that's the sorts of ideas that we think last in the longer term, like good thinking, that mean that you've got something to always hold on to, even if the short-term campaign effects aren't there. You know where the brand's going and you've created a North Star for it. So I think that's sort of one of the ways that we can get out of this hole, is to give brands, for want of a better word, a purpose or a point of view on the world, which means that everything you do adds up to something and it's not just about the short term. So I've got lots of reasons to think that strategy should command the centre stage going forwards and have a seat at the board. And I thought I'd, as an experiment, ask the people that worked in the department, I've got one of them here, the kind of questions that are being asked at the moment. Because one of my thoughts was we should be going to clients and persuading them to ask the questions that they're too busy to even ask, let alone answer. And I thought this is a flavour from just one day in the office of the kind of questions that they were thinking about. Of course, they're very specific to brands, but I think they illustrate the fact that we're still being asked really interesting things. So how does a traditional insurance brand, it's not Aviva, that prides itself on a quiet confidence stand out amongst its louder competitors? How does snacking look in an e-commerce world? How can we get millennials to play the lottery when that generation hates draw-based games? My favourite one is, how does a 40-year-old man with incontinence, why does a 40-year-old man with incontinence feel less embarrassed about his own DIY solution, usually involving condoms and tissue paper, than he does wearing a product that's purpose-made for the problem? I'm not saying that all of those are big strategic thoughts, but the fact that we're still being asked interesting questions encouraged me to think that there is going to be enough to keep good people interested in the industry. But I also think, I use that to illustrate, we have to ask some of the questions of our clients that they're not asking us. And I think if I was one sort of takeout from this, I would say, don't wait to be asked a question. Think to yourself, what are the questions that you think they should be asking themselves? Because back to some of the points earlier, you see the wider world than just the world of insurance or packaged goods or telephony. So you are able to see what's coming sometimes ahead of clients, or even you're maybe prepared to see something that they don't want to see because it's a really difficult thing to solve. And I think that is our job. I think we'll always be able to create ideas that are distinctive, that are famous, that shift a business for the better if we continue to ask those interesting questions of our clients. Thank you.